Welcome to the Injury Law Pod, the podcast that explores and demystifies the complex world of personal injury law. Each week, Missouri personal injury attorney Eric Bartlett dives into the legal issues surrounding personal injury cases to help you understand your rights and options when seeking justice and compensation for personal injuries. So sit back, relax, and let's explore the world of personal injury law together.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I'm your host, Eric Bartlett, and this is the podcast where we deal with all things personal injury law related. Today we have a special guest who is connected to Northland Injury Law. She is the daughter-in-law of our longtime teammate, Shelly Roth, who basically is one of the main backbones of this operation. She's been here. This week was her 22nd anniversary with us, and we're here today because we are recognizing Nurses Week, which this year is from May 6th through May 12th. And Heather Roth, who is here next to me, is a nurse, has been for about 7 years, I think.
Yep.
And works at Centerpoint, which is Centerpoint Regional.
Centerpoint Medical Center.
Centerpoint Medical Center, Independence.
Yeah.
Yes. And has been a nurse for 7 years, is a registered nurse. And we thought it would be interesting to have you on, just kind of go through, well, first, just your background, what made you decide to get into nursing, and then talk a little bit about what nurses go through, what the state of nursing is today, and, maybe some of the things that relate to what I do, which is I represent injured nurses. And obviously nurses see a lot of my clients that are injured in many other ways. And so we'll just kind of take it from here. And again, welcome.
Thank you.
And why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I wanted to always be a nurse since I was a little kid. I just have a deep compassion for caring for people. There was no specific instance in my life that made me want to become a nurse. It's just a passion and a calling of mine. So I actually started out at State Street, where my husband works, saving up my money to go to nursing school because it's very expensive. So I ended up going and graduating in 2017 with my RN. Started out as a brand new nurse in critical care, which I know everybody in nursing school, they say not to do that. They say to go to med surg to learn all the things, right? But I wanted to kind of immerse myself in the chaos so that I could kind of learn everything immediately. Spent 2 years in critical care. It was wonderful. I learned so much, and was recommended to take a manager position over the cardiac floor. Just my second year into nursing. So I actually went up to the 7th floor at the hospital and took over the cardiac floor and managed 60 plus nurses up there. It was wonderful. I went there for 4 years, a little over 4 years, and then started my family, and the hospital life was a little crazy. So I decided to go over to the clinic side, and I'm still in cardiac. I just run Midwest Heart and Vascular Services over there in the cardiology clinic, and love that dearly, but I get to go home at 5 and go home to my family. So I do miss the hospital. I miss the adrenaline, and I miss taking care of the patients over there, especially with the continued care over a 12-hour shift. But for right now, at this point in my life, the clinic's obviously a little easier. So
Sure.
Yeah.
And in the cardiology department that you're in now, so what are you seeing, or what kind of patients are you helping?
Yeah, so we see a wide variety of patients there. So we see anywhere from general cardiology patients who are just coming in for hospital follow-ups, who had a heart attack and went to the hospital. They never been a cardiology patient previously. We also run a heart failure clinic out of our office there. So patients who have low ejection fractions with their heart, they come in and see Dr. Dixon there for their heart failure. We do structural heart, where we do device implants to help certain patients with certain cardiac abnormalities. And yeah, we do procedures all the time out of that office. Our doctors round in the hospital and in the clinic. So it just kind of depends on what the day looks like that they do. They see patients every day, then they have lab days, and then they do down and procedure as well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And back when you were in the critical care, well, actually, let me ask you this
Sure.
first. So you indicated you're a registered nurse,
Uh-huh.
and maybe not everybody realizes there are different levels of nursing.
Yeah.
And what can you just talk about those?
Yeah. So are you talking about as far as degrees go?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Like where can you start?
Oh my gosh, you can go everywhere with nursing, which is kind of the wonderful thing about that. So I originally started with my associate's degree in nursing. Well, back up. I started as an LPN, which is a licensed practical nurse. But I was that for like 2 days and bridged over to my RN. And then I got my associate's in nursing, which is your RN. And then I went back for my bachelor's, which is your BSN. But then you can go in and get your master's, which is depending on what route you're taking in the hospital. If you're going to go up to like a director level or an ACNO or CNO of a hospital, you typically need your master's degree for that. Or if you're going to go into teaching, you need your master's degree for that. But then you can go as far as an FNP, get your doctorates in nursing. You can do CCRNA and do meds in the OR. It's kind of limitless as far
Is
as
that what a nurse practitioner is?
No, nurse
No.
practitioner. So we have nurse practitioners in our clinic. They also round in the hospital. So they work alongside the doctors, but they see patients on their own. They run clinic by themselves, and they just confer with the doctor with orders and things like that. But they run their own clinic. They can run clinics by themselves. And here in the state of Missouri, they can actually run all kinds of clinics without a doctor above them. So
okay. What's the difference between the LPN and the RN?
So as far as practicing goes, there's not really a lot. It just kind of depends on the hospital and the clinic that you work for. So for the longest time as an LPN, you couldn't work in the hospital. I think back in the day you used to be able to, but when I graduated nursing school, you didn't get to work as a LPN in a hospital, which is what a lot of people want to do. So LPNs are usually in nursing homes or clinics, kind of settings like that. But when I was on the hospital side at Centerpoint, we ran a really cool thing where we brought LPNs back to the hospital. They can do a lot of things. They just can't push medications. So anything that has to be remixed and pushed into an IV, they can't do that. There's certain medications they can't hang and they can't run blood. But everything else, with give or take a couple of things, they can do. It's within their scope.
Okay. And then obviously you mentioned multiple different levels, even above RN.
Yeah.
And I don't know to what extent it changes to what you can do as you gain that additional education.
Sure.
I mean, is there some?
So RN to BSN, there's no different things that LPN to RN, yes, there's just a few things that you couldn't do as an LPN that you can as an RN. RN to BSN is just one more step in your education. Usually comes with a pay bump depending on where you are. But as far as what you can do, what your scope is, that doesn't change. It just kind of depends on what job you get, right? So usually as a manager in the hospital, they prefer you to have your bachelor's degree. So it depends on kind of what role you want in the hospital. RN to MSN, same thing. No functionality differences, just depends on what role you want to be in. But then, your MSN to your FNP, your nurse practitioner, that greatly varies what your scope is. Then you're seeing patients on your own, you're rounding in the hospital, you're writing care plans for those patients, you're changing medications, you're conferring with the doctor, you're seeing patients by yourself. So
Got it. Okay.
yeah.
Well, so over the course of 7 years, how have you seen your field develop, change, whatever it's looked like? What's the evolution been?
It's changed in a lot of different ways. So whenever I first became a nurse, it was exactly what I dreamed of. It was, you make those special bonds with those patients and you're with them for 3 days because, when you're a full-time nurse, you work 3 days a week. That's considered full-time. And so I, was with patients sometimes from the time they got into the hospital until they were either discharged or they passed away, unfortunately. And it was wonderful because you got to know them and you got to know their families and you really got to connect with them and felt like you were really truly taking care of this person that you got to know and build a bond with. And it was like that for a few years. And then of course COVID hit, and then we were all just scraping by, honestly.
Yeah, talk about that, how that impacted everything.
It was terrible and it was wonderful at the same time. And I know that sounds twisted when I say wonderful, but I mean that because you were those patients' only person, right? So for the longest time, the hospital was closed. We didn't allow visitors, period. And so these people that were so sick and on their deathbeds, we were the ones that held their hands when they passed away. And it was terrible. It was a really, really hard time in healthcare for everybody. And the PPE that we had or didn't have was terrible. We were having to reuse things. Luckily, Centerpoint was very fortunate enough that we had a lot of donations and we had enough reserve that we didn't really have to reuse a lot of things. So, we were able to stay probably a lot safer than some other locations. But these patients would come in and a lot of them truly were in denial that they had COVID. They didn't believe COVID existed. They must have something else because there's no way COVID's made up. It's a government, plot for something. And it was unfortunate because within 24 hours, they were usually gone. And the body count was just insane. And some people, when you saw them when you came in the door, you knew that they probably had a day, maybe two, if that. And so coming to work was hard. And we all picked up extra shifts because we all got COVID too, and so when you got COVID, you were home for 2 or 3 weeks, and that made the nursing shortage even harder than what it was. And it was crazy because at the beginning of the COVID, we had no patients. It was really eerie. The hospital was empty because everything was shut down and everybody was staying home. And then kind of, a year after it hit and everybody was getting sick and people were out and about, then it was just, we were overloaded and we were admitting patients in the hall and we had patients in chairs, and that's where they stayed for their hospital duration. And our ER was overflowing and we were putting up tents and setting up places other places to take care of patients because our hospital just couldn't hold it anymore. And we were trying to find backup plans. Okay, can we house patients in our lobby? Can we house patients in the cafeteria? Because the cafeteria was closed. And just trying to find a place to take care of these people was challenging. And then after COVID, our staffing took a huge hit. People quit, people retired. This isn't obviously what a lot of people signed up for. You never think you're going to go through a pandemic. You read about it in school and you hear about all the horrible things that happened way back in the day, but you never think that it's going to happen to you. And so people quit their jobs, and my nurses who were, 50 plus, they were like, I'm retiring. This is it. I'm done with nursing. This is not I'm not bringing this home to my family. It's not worth risking my life. And they quit. And that's,
So they quit like somewhere during the pandemic,
yeah,
just because of all those concerns. And
I had nurses quit at the beginning of the pandemic. When things were starting to rev up, they were just like, no, I'm done with this. I'm not going to risk my life, risk my family's life. And no judgment. I don't blame them. It wasn't easy, and to each their own decision for sure. But then with a staffing shortage, we just never really bounced back after COVID. And I'm sure I speak for every hospital, but agency and all the things, it's just everywhere always pays more. You know what I mean? So there for a while, it seemed like people were chasing the money. It's who's going to pay me the most to go where. And so we were having trouble kind of getting even our backup resources into the hospital. And nowadays it just seems like, and I know this because I work very closely with the HR department. We offer huge bonuses for new grads to start at the hospital. And I hope I'm not quoting this wrong, but I think it's like a $30,000 sign-on bonus, and not one person has taken it. And the graduation rates are terribly low now for nursing school. And when I talk to a lot of my nursing friends, half of them aren't nurses anymore. They've gone into other fields. A lot of my friends who wanted to be nurses aren't going to nursing school. They don't have any want to do that anymore. And I think it's just because the ratios have changed. So we've gotten comfortable, so to speak, because we've taken care of so many patients for so long. And when I say ratios, like when I was in critical care, our ratio was 3 patients to 1 nurse. And we took full total patient care of those 3 patients. And then when I moved to the cardiac unit, it was like a 5 to 1. So 5 patients to 1 nurse. And then during COVID and right after COVID, it was 6. And now we're talking about going to 7. And when you're talking about taking care of critically ill patients who need you 12 hours, sometimes more than that, and it never stops, and they need blood and they need fluids and they need all these medicines that are timed, and you have to document and chart, because if you didn't chart, it didn't happen. You've got doctors spitting orders at you and they have to go down for testing, and when they come back up for testing, they're 4 hours behind on their meds, and you've got to play catch up, and now you're getting another admin, the ER is overflowing. Taking care of 6 patients is terrible. Like, it's really, really hard, and it's an injustice to we're not doing our patients any service by, I don't even know their name at the end of the day, and that was the hard part. And kind of, I really struggled with parting with the hospital because I wanted to see it change, but it wasn't like it was when I first got into nursing, where I had a true passion. At the end of the day, I felt good about what I did. Like when I went home, I was like, I knew my patient's name, I knew their husband, their daughters, their kids, what their dog's name was, and I felt really good about the care that I provided. And towards the end of my, hospital career for now, I couldn't even tell you who the patients were that I saw that day. And I was in the room several times, but I was so busy and my mind was going 50 different ways that I couldn't even remember their name. And I think a lot of nurses feel like that, and they hate that, because the nurses who are truly in it for the right reason want to know their patient, and they want to know their family, because they want to show that they truly care. And with the staffing ratios now, it's just impossible. So
wow. And you think that's probably industry wide?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I've got friends spread throughout the throughout the hospital systems, and it's a little bit better at some places, but everywhere is pretty much suffering the same kind of way. So,
and do you have any thoughts on why it is that people aren't going into nursing like they once were?
I think it's truly because of the workload. Because before it's not that it was easy, but it was manageable, and you felt like you could really take care of your patients. And now with the ratios being as high as they are, and the pay not compensating with that, so they're asking you to work more and work harder, but the pay doesn't match that. And to be away from your family, right? Compensation is let's be honest, it's what you need. So if you're asking me to step away from my family for 14 or 15 hours a day, you want to make sure that you are paying people accordingly. And I'm not saying that the pay, everybody wishes they make more money, I think, on the hospital side, just because you're taking care of people's lives. But I think that that's part of the reason, is that the ratios are getting higher and higher, and the expectations are getting more and more, and the pay is not getting any higher. So
it's interesting.
Yeah. And it's not just pay driven by any means. Like
right.
Some people still go into nursing and it's not just about the pay. I took a huge pay cut when I went to the clinic side, but I went to the clinic side for a multitude of reasons. I needed work-life balance. I needed to be at home with my husband and my kids. And I wanted to be able to feel like I was taking good care of people, and I wasn't filling my cup on the hospital side. And now I can go home with a sense of pride. Like, I knew that person, I know I did the best for them, and I have that feeling again on the clinic side, because it's not as chaotic.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if, the people that are coming out. So normally speaking, as a nurse, like as a new nurse, are you coming out and going into more of a hospital type setting first as opposed to a clinic setting?
Typically, yes. Typically new nurses do. They warn you, and I don't know if every nursing school is the same, but like my nursing school warned me that if you come out of nursing school and you go to a clinic, or you come out of nursing school and you go to like a hospice or something like that, where you're not utilizing all the skills that you just learned, it's kind of like, if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing. And that's so true in nursing, because, in nursing school, I learned peds and OBGYN for like 2 months of my 3.5 years that I went to school. And I couldn't tell you a single thing about them, because I didn't go into peds whenever I graduated, and I didn't go deliver babies when I graduated. So I have no idea how to do either of those things. Could I transition into those careers? Sure. And they would train me on the job because I have my BSN. But if you were to sit here and ask me questions, I would not have the answers to them. So it's kind of like that. If you go into a clinic where you're not utilizing the skills that you just learned in clinics at your nursing school, you're probably not going to remember it. So I think that a lot of people who are going to nursing school do strive to get in the hospital setting, so that it's instilled in their brain, because they're doing the things right off the bat.
Got it. Well, let's talk a minute about the kind of physical and emotional experiences you have as a nurse. So obviously in my world, we represent quite a few nurses who get hurt working, so I know a lot of the experience that, at least physically, nurses go through. I see a lot of injured backs, shoulders,
Sure.
Things like that. But just talk about that from your experience. I'm assuming when you're in critical care, especially, just talk about the physical and emotional.
Yeah. So physically, I think it's just like anybody would think it's being. So if you get a critical care, if you get a critical patient and they're either really, really super sick, or they've had some major, trauma or life event that's happened to them that's put them in not, in their normal mobility. So you're talking about lifting dead weight, first of all. And even if you're a 120-pound patient, lifting you dead weight is a lot of work, right? And so usually there's two of you. You're never supposed to lift a person by yourself. But even if I'm, say you're passed out on the floor and I'm trying to lift you off the ground, that's going to be a lot of work, right? And so you're doing that day in and day out, and you're helping people get up and go to the bathroom, or you're helping people get up and try to take those first couple steps after they've had a major heart surgery or a hip replacement or things like that. It eventually, you kind of learn to crouch over, and you're like, when you sit up straight, you're like, oh my gosh, that hurts almost. So the strain on your back is terrible. And then of course, being on your feet all day, my ankles and my knees would swell all the time. And you can wear TED hose, but I would get like knee muffin tops from wearing TED hose all day. So yeah, the physical strain is definitely there just from running around, chaotic for 12 plus hours a day. And then the emotional strain is, if you truly care about your profession as a nurse and you're connecting with your patients, you feel everything that they feel. And so when I was in PCU, there was a lot of times that, I'd have to perform life-saving measures on somebody and they didn't always make it. And that was really unfortunate. And I laughed with those people and I cried with those people and I held their families' hands when they passed away. And you go through all of the emotions, and then you go home and you almost beat yourself up, like, what could I have done differently? Unless it was a hospice patient and you anticipated it coming. If somebody just coded randomly and you did CPR for an hour and they don't make it, and then you think, what if I would have been in the room 5 minutes before and I would have done this, or I would have seen this, or, and I feel like it never stops going through your head, the what ifs. And I still to this day, when I was going to nursing school, I was a patient care tech. And I was working at a different hospital, and I was studying to go to nursing school, and I was taking care of a patient, worked on a women's unit, and these patients were, mastectomies, hysterectomies, things like that, pretty common things. And I was taking care of a patient, and her whole family had been there that day, and she was getting ready to discharge. And she's like, you know what, I'm gonna take a shower real quick because I don't want to take home hospital on me. And I was like, totally get that. Walking, talking, visited her whole family that day. I stepped outside of her room, put her in the shower, stepped outside of her room to chart something. And I said, I'm going to come back and check on you in 5 minutes just to make sure you don't need anything. And she said, you don't have to check on me. I'm totally fine. And I said, I just want to do it just for me. And I knocked on her door and I asked if she was okay, and she didn't answer. And so I walked into her room and I knocked on the bathroom door and she didn't answer. And when I opened the bathroom door, she was on the ground in the shower, non-responsive. And I did CPR in the shower, in the water, on the floor, and couldn't get her back. And we never got her back. And bless that CEO of the hospital at the time, because he's the one who called me at home to tell me that she threw a blood clot. And there was literally nothing I could have done. Because with, pulmonary embolisms, very rarely do you make it. And I still remember that. So, but I loved, I remember that, and I remember her, and I loved taking care of her. And it was so unfortunate that she passed away, especially from just something, a common procedure that people have all the time.
Well, and you thought she's fine and she's fine. Doing great. And
you just never know. And so I think nurses carry that with them all the time. They lose a lot of patients, and especially with COVID. And unfortunately with COVID, when we were getting overran with COVID, we were literally just putting people in body bags and getting them out of the room and on to the next patient. It felt so terrible. It felt terrible just to not be able to spend that time with the patient, and they died without their family. And I think that that's like a scar that nurses have to carry with them in their mind emotionally forever, for the rest of their lives. So it definitely takes a toll. And I think that if you are a nurse and you truly care about your job, that's something that truly, you never forget those families, and you never forget those patients' faces that you coded and didn't make it, or even the ones you coded and did make it. You never forget those moments. So
yeah, well, that's powerful stuff. What and you mentioned in the PCU, and that's the critical care. What is that? I mean, I know ICU. So what's the difference?
So PCU is a progressive critical care unit. So they're not quite as critical as they would be as if they're in ICU. They're getting better, or their status has changed just enough to where they're a little bit more stable than they were in ICU. And they're usually like intubated in ICU. So we've extubated them. They're awake. We think that maybe they're going to make some improvements, so we transfer them to the PCU. So that was the unit that I was on, and they're still on the line, right? They're still not in the safe zone. So oftentimes I transfer them right back to the ICU because they weren't they ended up not being as stable as we thought they were, or they code and we get them back and we have to send them back to the ICU to stabilize them a little bit more. So still a stressful unit, just not as critical as ICU.
And I assume in that area, you see a lot of the types of people that I see, seriously injured some way, somehow. Obviously, I generally see people that have been injured by somebody else's doing. Obviously, people get injured in many other ways.
Sure.
But I assume you saw a lot of trauma type situations.
Yeah, a lot of traumas. We're a level 2 trauma hospital, so we see gunshot wounds, motor vehicle accidents, all kinds of crazy things. I worked in surgery for a pre-op for a brief moment of time, and the amount of motor vehicle accidents that come in, gunshots literally from just across the street at Independence Center happen all the time, unfortunately. So yeah, you see a lot of scary things that come through there. A lot of people come, have major heart attacks and have open heart surgery. We treated a lot of those patients too. So
yeah, and I always talk about, it blows my mind how many car accidents there are. And what I've said before on this podcast is I am just one personal injury lawyer amongst a lot, just here in Kansas City. And, we get calls every day from people that have been in car accidents. And I just can't even imagine at a hospital location, how many of those you see. And sadly, the other thing you're talking about, which is becoming, a more frequent occurrence, I think, or at least certainly it remains high, is gunshots and things like that.
Yeah. And we get a lot of, since we are in a highly crime rated area, we get a lot of the police officers and firefighters and things like that. And we're, so proud and lucky to serve those people, but it is very devastating to take care of, someone who served and then somebody just wasn't smart and, made the wrong decision and killed somebody, so we see a lot of police officers, unfortunately, too. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome that you guys are there for them. And listen, Northland Injury Law is a big fan of nurses. So personally, I have been in the hospital twice in my life. One of those was for back pain that went into another level. And then the other one was COVID. And I actually spent 6 days in the hospital for COVID and very fortunately made it through. But I will tell you, my experiences with nurses have always been phenomenal. They are the part of the unsung heroes. They do care. Every nurse I've ever come in contact with truly cares about people. They want to help. They want to support. And so, we started back in COVID times connecting with healthcare providers. We did something with Centerpoint and your group to show our appreciation. And we've continued that on to this day. And so I want to thank you for being a nurse.
Thank you.
And doing what you do. And I want to thank all the nurses for what they do. And I want to thank you for coming on here and just giving a little bit of insight. People don't necessarily appreciate everything that really underlies a nurse's life.
Yeah.
And I think today you've obviously been able to just give a little glimpse into that.
Yeah.
Is there anything that, I haven't asked or, that we didn't talk about?
Yeah, I think that, if you are ever out there and you see a nurse, just give them grace because you don't know what they've been through. And I know that, COVID's over, but a lot of people are pretty traumatized still. And nursing is just so hard. It's a struggle. You're taking care of people and you're saving or unfortunately not saving their lives, and they take that home with them. It's not, you don't get to clock out at the end of the day and go home. It's something that's just, it's always running through your mind. So yeah, I think that.
And what would you say to somebody that's listen, I know people that are going to nursing school.
Yeah.
What would your advice be, or what would your take be at this point?
I think that we desperately need great nurses that still have passion for what they do. And I think that there is a special spot for every nurse out there, whether you want to go to the hospital or not. I don't think any decision is a wrong decision when it comes to being a nurse. There is always some place that needs you. Patients need people everywhere. And so I don't think any decision is a wrong decision, but I hope that everybody that is a nurse or is going to nursing school, I hope everybody's not jaded, because I get it. There's a lot of jaded nurses out there, and they're sick and tired of the ratios, and they're sick and tired of not being compensated the way they feel they should be compensated. And I get that. But there's patients that need us still, and it's not their fault. And I think that I myself have to tell myself that, even especially when I was still on the hospital side, I have patients to take care of, and nothing that is happening is their fault. And I need to go, and I owe it to them to give them the best of me as long as I am there. And I hope that there's other people out there with that mindset that are going into nursing school or getting ready to graduate.
Well, that's awesome. And again, I should have said earlier too, again, I have many clients that have all had nursing care. And again, 9.5 times out of 10, they love their nurses. Whether they love their doctors, whether they love other people, it's another question.
Sure.
But the nursing staff is usually pretty solid reviews. So
that's great.
Well, thanks again for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having
Appreciate
me.
it. And this week we celebrate you all.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Heather.